Alright guys, so we're going to take a look at just a few of the things that were happening at home during World War II. So some of the domestic things in terms of the U.S. So one of the big things is that Roosevelt needed to convince the American people that going to war was the right thing to do, right? Because in 1940 he had basically said that we would not be going into the war and we would not be actually dedicating any troops to the war, and so he has to go back on that. So one of the things that he did is he gave what was called the Four Freedoms speech. He articulated in January of 1941 about the fundamental freedoms people should enjoy. And so again, this is almost a full year prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, but just kind of preparing the American people, right, of the importance of democracy. So he articulated the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. So one of the things is that Norman, American painter, he actually took the four freedoms, and they were used. His paintings were used as kind of a propaganda for buying war bonds. So we have freedom of worship, okay, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, right? And of course, the manipulative parents with their kids, right? You want to protect your kids. So one of the other big things, of course, was that after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States decided to President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, and what it basically did was it relocated Japanese people to internment camps. 120,000 Japanese were interned as possible spies, and basically for their own protection, according to the United States government. This also applied to Germans and Italians, but only 11,000 Germans and 6,000 Italians did this happen to. So again, you can see here on the map some of the areas in which they were relocated to. And so some of the pictures from that time. I'm a Japanese family, right? I am an American. Do not do this to us. Right, ouster of all Japs in California is near, right? So from the San Francisco Examiner. Japanese children. Families being relocated, right? Waiting for the trains. Very similar to what happened in Europe. Okay, very similar picture of what happened in Europe also, right? The Japanese arriving at the camps. And then, of course, the family. No Japs wanted. So, one of the things that happened is one of these Japanese men, a guy by the name of Fred Korematsu of San Leandro, decided that he was not going to put up with this. And so he actually sued the United States government in what is known as Korematsu versus the United States. So in this case, Korematsu versus the United States, the Supreme Court ruled, he was suing under the 14th and 5th Amendments. And so one of the things that and of course the writ of habeas corpus, one of the things that the United States government ruled was that because of the 1940 Smith Act, the Smith Act was actually ratified by Congress, which was very similar to the Espionage Act, that the federal government did reserve the right, that the president had the right to do this in order to protect the safety of the American people. Eventually, in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was passed, in which the United States government actually gave reparations in terms of $20,000 to Japanese families that were affected by the internment. One of the most decorated units of the entire war was the 442, the 442nd Regiment, all Japanese unit during World War II. Families were all interned in concentration camps. Majority of them were volunteers. They won 21 medals of honor, and again, this was all while their families were in the camps. African Americans, they participated in the war also, like I said. They had a slogan called the WWii. The idea was that victory abroad would equal victory at home in terms of freedom. The migration into northern cities, right, included more West Coast cities in World War I. Many race riots during 1943. Over 1 million blacks served in the war. Some of the most famous, of course, were the Tuskegee Airmen. And many of these men coming back from the war became some of the leaders of the civil rights movement because they still did not have freedom. Famous African-American leader during this time is A. Philip Randolph. He knew that the Second Great Migration was going to mean more labor problems for blacks. So he actually began advocating for fair employment practices. And so Congress eventually passed under Roosevelt the Fair Employment Practices Commission to oversee the fair treatment of African Americans during the war. Latinos during the war, right? Latino military involvement totaled over 100,000. Again, we talked about the Bracero program in 1942. Operation Wetback, and then one of the most famous incidents too was the Zoot Suit riots. So make sure you look it up what it is, and then we'll talk about it in class. And then Native Americans, 44,000 enlisted soldiers during World War II. They were used as code talkers. Some of them are Cherokee, Choctaw, Navajo, and Comanche. And then, like I said, women, 6 million wartime jobs. 3 million women participated as Red Cross workers. 200,000 served in the military. Again, we talked about General George Marshall. The Women's Auxiliary Corps served as radio operators, nurses, and sometimes cooks. And then in terms of the Holocaust, right? Make sure you look up the voyage of the St. Louis. We'll ask about it in class. There was a lot of American anti-Semitism, a lot of American isolationism, right? In 1942, the State Department knew about the German final solution. 43, the State Department knew of the Warsaw Ghetto. In 1944, the State Department also knew about Auschwitz. Yet again, nothing was done to assist because the United States did not want to use up some of its resources to deal with the quote-unquote Holocaust.